Bonjour, je m'appelle Agathe Le Failler, je suis étudiante en première année de master langue et culture celtique en contact à l'UBO à Brest. Aujourd'hui, j'ai décidé d'en apprendre un peu plus sur le festival de l'Eisteddfod qui se déroule au Pays de Galles et qui fait la promotion de la langue, la culture et la littérature galloise. C'est pourquoi j'ai décidé d'interviewer Aneirin Karadog, un barde gallois qui a été récompensé lors d'un concours de poésie galloise pendant ce festival. Hello, I'm Agathe Le Failler. I'm a first-year student of the Master Languages and Celtic Cultures in Contact at the UBO in Brest. Today I've decided to know more about the Eisteddfod, a festival in Wales which promotes the Welsh language, literature and culture. That's why I'm going to interview Aneirin Karadog, a Welsh bard who was awarded a prize at a poetry competition during this festival. So, hello Aneirin.
Hello Agathe.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yes, I'm enjoying life in UBO while I'm here.
So, could you present yourself in a few words?
I'm a Welsh and Breton speaker. I'm from Wales, my mother's from Brittany. I'm currently teaching, working as an English lecteur, teaching oral English and a bit of medieval Welsh in UBO and enjoying that. But otherwise in Wales I work mainly as a poet. I've worked a bit in TV as well, but I take a keen interest in languages as well, and the Eisteddfod.
Okay, so talking about the Eisteddfod, it's a Welsh word, so what does it mean?
It's a composite word of Eistedd and bod, and Eistedd means to sit and bod means to be, so it means to be in sitting. Imagine the American Indians, indigenous Indians, maybe sitting passing the peace pipe. They're probably Eistedd and bod. So yes, it's to be in session, I suppose, and yeah.
And what kind of festival is it?
It's a cultural festival, and its aim is to promote the Welsh language, quite simply, but it's a festival by today's standards that is a real festival. In olden days it was more maybe of a competition, but these days they've opened a bar. Before there wasn't a bar, so a lot of people have different reasons for being at the Eisteddfod.
Okay. And are there different categories of Eisteddfodai?
Yes. There's the National Eisteddfod of Wales, which happens in August, and then in May, in the Whitsun holiday, there's the Youth Eisteddfod of Wales in the Urdd, and then all year round there are various levels of Eisteddfod. Certain villages in Wales might have their own Eisteddfod, or you might have regional Eisteddfod as well. But yeah, the main one is in August, and the main Eisteddfod, the National Eisteddfod, is a travelling Eisteddfod, as is the National Youth Eisteddfod of the Urdd as well. So it goes from place to place, normally south to north and back and forth between South and North Wales.
So it's every year and it changes places?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a big debate actually, should the Eisteddfod be in a fixed location or not, but a lot of people argue against that, because the beauty of the Eisteddfod is that it changes place every year and it can affect the linguistic energy of the area that it's visiting, and hopefully reinvigorate and re-energize the local Welsh speakers, or maybe entice people to learn Welsh in the areas that it visits.
Okay. And do you know since when it is organized?
The National Eisteddfod as we know it now has existed since the late 19th century in this form. So we have records going back of the chair winner and the crown winner and so on, maybe back to 1880, for example. But the original, the first written record of any Eisteddfod was in 1176 in Aberteifi in Cardigan today, and Arglwydd Rhys, Lord Rhys, who built the original fort and castle in Aberteifi in Cardigan. He held an Eisteddfod where he called bards and harpists to come and compete against each other for the main prize of the best bard and the best harpist. And there are written records of that Eisteddfod, which suggests that the Eisteddfod is something that happened before then, but we only know of a written record of it going back to 1176.
What are the types of events organized?
So you have the main event in the main pavilion, the biggest tent, choral events, the daily ceremony. So there's the crown ceremony for a free verse poem, the chair ceremony for a strict meter poem. You have a drama medal and a music medal. You have singing competitions, choral competitions, dancing competitions, all those types of things going on in the main pavilion every day. And then around that you have a field. It's like a big cultural ghetto where you get stalls set up where people promote their organizations, maybe sell things. There's a food place. There's also a concert area now, so there are bands playing all day and up until in the evening as well. And also you have a youth site, a youth field called Maes B, Field B, literally. Then we have the main field and then the B field. And in that site, young people go and they stay and they camp, and it's a bit like Ylevier Charrue or Glastonbury, and you have young bands and rock bands and dance music, and young people like to go away from their parents and stay with their friends there. And I don't know what goes on. Well, everyone who's as a rites of passage has stayed in Maes B at some point, and probably regretted it the day after. But yeah, it's great to show that a youth wing of Welsh culture exists, and that people can have fun using Welsh language, and also enjoy contemporary music that is just as good as any English or French music that we hear today.
So what's the aim of this festival? Why would you say this?
Yeah, the main aim, well, you also have the Gorsedd of the Druids, which is concurrent to the Eisteddfod, but they are two separate entities, but both couldn't live without each other either. But the Gorsedd has as its main objective the maintenance and the enhancement of the Welsh language, and the Eisteddfod as well. So the point of having an Eisteddfod that travels around Wales is that it gives the language, it shows people that the language is alive, but it also gives people incentive to learn the language. Also, Welsh speakers tend to go to the Eisteddfod just so they can have a week of not having to speak English at all. And you know, everything in the Eisteddfod happens in Welsh, and it's really energizing for the soul, because then if you live in an English-speaking area of Wales, for example, you go back for the rest of the year and you deal with not being able to speak Welsh to everyone. There are some communities in West and North Wales which are predominantly Welsh-speaking, so it's a different experience again. But yes, it's a week where you get to just speak Welsh, and you don't have to start every conversation maybe in English, not knowing if the people speak Welsh. You start your conversation in Welsh. You probably see some people that you don't see for the rest of the year in the Eisteddfod. It works in the other sense as well. You probably try to avoid some people that you only see once a year in the Eisteddfod as well. But it is, yes, a really great chance to be able to speak Welsh. And there are similar festivals, I'd say. In Scotland you have the Mod, and in Ireland you have the Oireachtas, which are cultural talent festivals as well. And I think you have a similar Gwyl Broadel a Bresunic in Brittany as well, which might have been inspired by the Eisteddfod. But the Eisteddfod is probably the biggest festival of its type, and the one that dates back the longest as well.
So So how does it promote the Welsh language and the bardic tradition?
Well, it normalises the Welsh language. First of all, people can speak their language, and children can go there and be surprised that they hear other children speak Welsh, for example, or other families. So that in itself is very important. But also, all the events, there is a Welsh only rule. So in any public event in the Eisteddfod or any stage in the Eisteddfod, only Welsh can be spoken. So in that sense, it promotes the Welsh language. It gives the Welsh language a breathing space, but also then the prizes that are given are for excellence within the Welsh language, for drama writing, for writing novels, poetry, for reciting, singing, and so on. So you hopefully create a culture of excellence all year round that gets rewarded. Some people, of course, they rebel against the Eisteddfod because they see it as a bit over-traditional sometimes. It doesn't accept the avant-garde, but the Eisteddfod eventually always catches up. And then in terms of the poetic tradition, we give prizes. There are little smaller literary prizes, homework tasks that are published in the adjudications and publications of the Eisteddfod. There's a volume of literature that is published every year coming from the Eisteddfod, and that also contains the main prizes for the crown and the chair. So the chair, as I noted, is written for is a prize given for strict meter poetry, and you have to write an ode of about 250 lines or 300 lines. So it's quite a task. You can't just write it the night before. You have to think about it. You get given the details of the next year's competition the July before the Eisteddfod, so the year before. So you have a whole year and a month to work on it. Well, you actually have to give in the work by April the 1st, so the deadline is quickly upon us. Anybody who's thinking of writing, if you want to write your ode in Welsh, your time is now. But yes, and then for the crown, it's for free verse poetry, meaning you don't write in Cynghanedd for the crown. For the chair, then, less people compete because less people know the rules of Cynghanedd, but a surprising amount of people still compete. You get maybe a dozen people competing for the chair, and maybe between 30 and 40 people competing for the crown every year.
How is it broadcasted?
Well, the BBC has blanket coverage of it on TV and radio, on Radio Cymru and Radio Wales, and it's shown all through the day. So if you hate the Eisteddfod, you can't really escape the Eisteddfod during that week of August. And also there are highlight programs on S4C, and the BBC provide a service for S4C, so it's broadcast all in Welsh, but then the National News of Wales, BBC Wales Today, and the English channels, they do highlight programs as well. And then there is coverage every day in the Western Mail or the Daily Post, the South Wales and North Wales based newspapers of Wales. And then there are Twitter accounts, and people use hashtags relating to the Eisteddfod in various ways. So it's quite, a buzz of activity during that week.
Is it followed by a lot of people?
Yes, if you look at the Eisteddfod Twitter account, to be slightly current, I know Twitter's not the most up-to-date social media platform, but I think there are maybe 15 to 20,000 followers to the Eisteddfod, which is quite a lot for a Welsh language account. And also every day you get between 10 and 20,000 people, it depends on the year, on the weather, on the location, coming every day. So if you add that up, it comes to maybe 150,000 visitors over the week, that go to stay there. So you get the campsites as well. A lot of people like to go in their caravan. For example, for this year's Eisteddfod happening in August in Cornwy, Llanrwst in the county of Cornwy, the caravan site. The Welsh can be maybe quite middle class about their caravanning, but the caravan site reservations has sold out in under 2 hours. So if you want to take your caravan, you might need to hope they extend the field and put on an extra field. So a lot of things like that go quite suddenly. And also there are concerts in the evening. So different people might go to the concerts that happen in the main pavilion compared to the ones that compete. As I noted, different people have different reasons for going to the Eisteddfod. So in the evening they commission special concerts that might be a comedy show or a choir evening and so on, or artistic performances or theatrical pieces, and those attract a lot of people, a few thousand people to go and see them in the evenings as well. So it has a different following: competitors, visitors, people who just like to speak Welsh, people who enjoy music, and also, you know, people who enjoy poetry as well. If you're a poet, you have a very busy week ahead of you doing poetic things. Yeah.
And do you know how many people are involved among the organizers, volunteers, employees, participants, or visitors?
Yes, the Eisteddfod has quite a lot of staff, well, quite a small amount of staff if we consider how massive the event is, but they have a dozen to 20 staff in Cardiff, and the same in North Wales. They have 2 offices, and then also they depend a lot on voluntary local committees. So once the Eisteddfod has been announced, a local committee is set up, and then there are subcommittees. The literature committee that decides on the themes for the competitions, the youth committee, the youth subcommittee that helps organise the bands and things like that, and so on and so on. And then you have to raise money as well. There is some public subsidy given by the National Assembly, but also people have to raise money. So you arrange concerts in the 2 or 3 years before the Eisteddfod comes. You know the Eisteddfod is coming because there's a big fundraising event. So in terms of the volunteers, it comes to the hundreds, if not the 1,000 in the end. You need people for parking, stewards, you need people to steward the main pavilions, to keep the doors shut during competitions and so on. It's quite a hive of activity in that sense. And if you consider a farmer gives his field maybe for the Eisteddfod, you have to put hardcore or gravel down to, well, otherwise it gets muddy, and well, it's Wales, so it's a bit like Brittany, it rains a lot even in August. So considerations like that take up a lot of money as well. You can be talking hundreds of thousands of pounds just for the infrastructure of the Eisteddfod, let alone paying people to come and participate. If you want to attract big singers like Bryn Terfel, the opera singer, he came last year to do one of the nightly concerts. They probably get paid quite a bit as well. So yeah, it's quite a big budget, it's a big production, but the Eisteddfod office, the team, they are preparing 2 Eisteddfods or 3 Eisteddfods ahead all the time. So once they're in one Eisteddfod, they're trying to get that to run smoothly, no traffic problems in the area, and so, all kinds of considerations, but also they're thinking of the next Eisteddfod and the year after that as well.
So now I wanted to know more about your experience as a bard, and so how did it begin?
It probably began before I started writing poetry, through an awareness maybe of cultural awareness of the poetic tradition of Wales. And then in my school, in my comprehensive school, we every St. David's Day on March the 1st, we would have a school Eisteddfod, and in that Eisteddfod there would be a chairing of the bard as well. So the teachers would set a competition, and you would write your poetry and give it in, and then an adjudicator from outside school, or maybe a teacher who had experience adjudicating literature, would then adjudicate the competition and decide on a winner. And I sent in a poem when I was in year 10, aged 15 I think. I think it's troisième en France in terms of school age, and I won the chair, and I didn't expect to do so, and it made me think, oh, maybe I should do more of this. I was also writing pop songs with my brother. We thought we were Lennon-McCartney, Karadog and Karadog, but we were definitely not. And I have a big file at home that I shall not reveal to anyone of about 106 terrible pop songs and lyrics that maybe I should burn as soon as I find them again. But it was an interest in playing with lyrics and words and languages as well, writing in English and Welsh. But yeah, once I'd won the chair in the school Eisteddfod, and also then chosen Welsh as an A-level subject, like the bac in France, where you have to analyse Cynghanedd, for example. I wanted to know more about Cynghanedd and that tradition, so I went to nightly classes and took lessons for that. So yeah, it developed in school.
So are there bards in your family?
My grandmother wrote one poem I know of called I Do Not Wish Remembrance. I do not wish remembrance, no tombstone to my name. I can't remember any of that. But yeah, I remember her making an impression on me, and it's quite well, impressive for me to see my grandmother, but she wasn't, she hadn't been to university and so on like that, and she came from a coal mining, non-Welsh speaking area, but generally no, there weren't any bards in my family, but my parents are keen linguists, so maybe playing with languages and the connections between languages and the Celtic languages might have been laying the groundwork maybe for becoming a poet, I suppose.
Were you taught by someone?
Well, yes, as I mentioned, when I was in sixth form, so when I was 17, I went to night classes. In Wales, you can go to night classes for learning Cynghanedd, like people go to night classes to learn a language. There are also Cynghanedd classes, and they're very popular. There are classes in Cardiff, Swansea, Carmarthenshire, Cardigan, Aberystwyth, North Wales as well, Caernarfon, Bangor, and various other places in Wales. There are also handbooks that have been written over the years, so you can learn Cynghanedd in that way. There's even a Twitter account at Cynghaneddi, which has been giving Twitter lessons, lessons in Cynghanedd. So yes, I went to a class where a teacher who was experienced in Cynghanedd taught the rules, and for the first 2 years of learning, I was just learning the rules, but also as you learn the rules, you're learning the sensibilities of poetry as well, because two main things are taught you. Cynghanedd is something for the year. Even though there are grammatical structures and rules, you need to listen to the year and to the music of the year and trust what your years tell you. But also, not every line of Cynghanedd is a line of poetry. For example, you can have Cynghanedd lines in English or in any language. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are great lines of poetry. For example, make fish the dish of the day is a Cynghanedd sign, and it was used unknowingly by them in Young's Fish Company, advertising their frozen fish product. If you think about think before you drink and drive is a sign we see on the side of the road, a warning given by the police authorities. It's a Cynghanedd as well. Maybe it is a big line of poetry as well, but that's debatable. So learning the rules of Cynghanedd is one thing. It's like learning a language in itself. So once you know Cynghanedd, I suppose if you know another language well, you can write in that language in Cynghanedd as well. So because Welsh is my first language, Breton also, I'm not quite as fluent in terms of the vast knowledge of vocabulary that you need maybe to do Cynghanedd in Breton, but I've tried, and you can have some lines like "Et très trous à la boussette" is a Cynghanedd sign, a Cynghanedd lisg in Breton, for example. But yeah, it can work, and there are poets who have done it in Welsh and English. So there are people who teach Cynghanedd, and they are known as Cynghanedd teachers. They're normally poets themselves. And what you tend to find that happens as well is that experienced poets in Wales tend to want to mentor or want to give something back to the younger generation in order to make sure that people are still learning Cynghanedd but also writing poetry to the highest standard possible. So I find I've started mentoring people who are 17, 18 or in their 20s, teaching them not only Cynghanedd but then they contact you, sending you poems to have a look at, and you know, it can be quite annoying maybe, you'd think, to receive poems that you have to go through and look at them, but I think it's quite an honour that people share their work with you like that, and that they want to know your opinion on their work. So you need to be sensitive also and try to give constructive remarks, I think, and in that way the tradition is continuing.
Have you been influenced by other poets?
Yes, I think you study a lot of poetry in school, and one poet we can't get away from maybe in 20th century Wales and the turn of the millennium was Gerall Lloyd Owen, who wrote many patriotic Welsh poems poking the subconscious of Wales, asking people, are you doing the most possible for your own language and so on. But other poets who have influenced me because they've done a lot of work performing their poetry live maybe in recent years is Tom Morris, who's a Breton speaker as well, Myrddin ap Dafydd, and then you get bards like Iwan Llwyd, who have toured the world and written about the world they've seen in Welsh, which has brought exotic aspects into Welsh poetry, and also great poets who are still alive today as well, who are still haven't reached their prime maybe even, Ceri Wyn Jones or Tudur Dylan Jones, a lot of Joneses of course in Wales. But there are many poets, and also the first lady to win the chair, Aneirin Hopwood, she's a great poet also, and Karen Owen, for example, another great female poet who has not won the chair, but it doesn't matter because you know that she's reached a high standard. So yes, there are many contemporary poets that have influenced me, but also maybe Dafydd ap Gwilym you'd have to look at as an eternal influence on people, and also I could go on, Dick Jones, Alan Llwyd. It's been traditionally quite a male-dominated thing, so it's good to see now more women writing poetry and getting acclaim for writing poetry, and also more women writing in Cynghanedd. And I hope we can get away from the macho image of Cynghanedd being for men, like maybe cooking being for chefs, for male chefs only. You know, I think there's no reason why women can't write in Cynghanedd just as well, if not better than men.
Okay. What is it like to be a modern bard?
It's fun, yeah, it's surprising. I've recently just about completed a programme for France 3, which will be broadcast in Breton, on Ballybrace, and in Welsh as well, with subtitles. A Breto-Welsh collaboration between France 3 and S4C, and we look at the poetic tradition of Wales and comparing elements. Is there Cynghanedd in Breton and so on? And the main thing that strikes me is that in Wales there is a big vibrant Welsh language poetry scene these days, where people enjoy going to poetry evenings, poetry competitions, and if you're a poet in Brittany, it strikes me you're a much lonelier character. Maybe there are people who write poetry in Breton, but they don't associate with other poets. They don't go to poetry evenings where they read their poetry live to other audiences and so on. So I think there's a community based feel to being a poet in Wales, and also in the real community that within which you live. People, if they know you're a poet, you're done for, because they're going to ask you for poetry all the time. So can you write a poem for my auntie who's having her birthday, or my friend is getting married, can you write a poem for that, or my cat has died? Well, maybe not, but you know, even for deaths as well. So you provide a social service in a way. And that's very important, I think, and that goes back through the poetic tradition and is still reflected in the modern work of a poet today. And also, finally, I'd like to add that I recently went to work as a poet professionally through the medium of Welsh language, and the way you accomplish that is not by just publishing books of poetry, because they don't sell as well as novels, but you can make a living if you go around schools teaching the craft of poetry and getting young people engaged and having fun with poetry. There's a living to be made doing that, providing commission work for people, and also on top of that publishing your work in volumes of poetry and in anthologies and so on, and you find you can actually make a living, but it's quite hard as well. Maybe you need to make a bit of a name for yourself, and certainly where the Eisteddfod comes into play, if you win one of the major prizes, then you get a platform and a license to become a poet, I suppose.
How has the bardic tradition evolved since the first Eisteddfod was organized?
Well, the bardic tradition, first of all, in terms of written form, goes back to the 6th century, as you know. Aneirin and Taliesin in the Old North, writing poetry in what is known as Glasgow today. They must have had competitions or poetry evenings or events, or as I mentioned, the social purpose of poetry, to eulogize or to mark anniversaries or important events in society. But since maybe the first Eisteddfod in Aberteifi, the poetry tradition has become very formalised, and in the medieval times the biggest aspect of it was writing in Cynghanedd, and if you were a professional poet, there was a professional poetic circuit which people could follow and be paid for being poets. And then in the 17th, 18th century, that circuit disappeared because we lost our princes. The barons and lords started to turn to speak English rather than Welsh, so they wouldn't be patrons of Welsh poetry. The situation of the Welsh poet then evolved, and thankfully maybe to the Renaissance in Europe, the idea of reading books and the Enlightenment might have made people take an interest in their own poetic tradition, and might have given Welsh poetry a boost and continuation through that sense. So through the 17th, 18th century, 19th century, people would have taught poetry themselves through books, but not have made a living from it. And then now, in the 20th century, 21st century, some poets make a living, but a lot of poets marry their poetry work with other jobs, maybe as teachers, broadcasters, editors for publishing houses and so on. They might marry them with totally different jobs, or they might do it with similar language-based jobs as well. The poet today as well might tend to be university educated, middle class, whereas maybe in the 20th century you'd have had more builders, farmers, uneducated people, formerly uneducated, who would have enjoyed poetry as well. You get maybe less of that, but I'd love to find maybe builders and farmers who don't go to university but also end up writing poetry as well, and it's not impossible for that to happen, because I think the Welsh language culture is still alive today as well.
So I wanted to know more also about the chairing of the bard, because you won the chair a few years ago. So what kind of event is it?
So it's the pinnacle, and it's not just me saying, but it's on the Friday afternoon, so it's the pinnacle of the week, a culmination of the Eisteddfod, and it's the ceremony that fills the pavilion the most. People, the crown ceremony happens on a Monday afternoon, and that also includes the Celtic nations coming to promote their own cultures as well, and they do a speech in one of the Celtic nations every year. But the crowning ceremony is not full. The pavilion is maybe 3/4 full. For the chairing of the bard, you have queues outside, and a lot of people who are déçus, who are disappointed that they didn't make it into the chairing ceremony. So you write your it all happens months before. You write your poetry, you try to compete, hopefully to win, and you have the deadline of the 1st of April to send your work into the Eisteddfod. The Eisteddfod then sends the work on to 3 adjudicators, 3 judges, who then have to meet up and discuss the poetry they've received. And if it's like La Récolte du Porto, making of port wine. In some years they declare there is no vintage. The wine wasn't good enough to make a port vintage, and in some years, sorry for the alcohol-based comparison, but the chairing of the bard is a similar thing in terms of if the poetry has not reached a certain standard that the judges are not happy, they won't give the chair. So there's big jeopardy. Won't they give the chair to a poet? Will we go away disappointed? And in that event, it's a big downer. People are quite depressed. Oh well, there's no chair. It kills the mood. So when people actually win the chair, it's a big joyous occasion, and then you get to share in that moment. So if you have won the chair, you get a letter or a phone call a few months before to tell you that you've won, to make sure that you will turn up, because we have to have the person who's won the chair in the ceremony first of all. And famously, Hedd, the First World War poet, died before receiving the chair, so that's called y Gadair Ddu, the black chair, because they threw a black veil. He wasn't alive to receive his chair. So you get a phone call. If you haven't won the chair, you don't get a phone call at all. So it's really frustrating, maybe in a sense, because you have to wait until the ceremony to hear what the judges are going to say. It's very secretive. If you have won the chair, you're supposed to keep it secret. And there are some stories of when T.Llew Jones won the chair in 1958. Apparently, people were coming up to him and shaking his hand on the Eisteddfod mice beforehand, saying, "Congratulations on winning the chair. We've heard you're going to win this week." And it's a big no-no. You shouldn't let people know. So it's a big surprise, and only you and your close family or friends would know. But some people don't even tell their close friends. It depends. Can you trust the person to keep a secret or not? But then, so the big day arrives and the pavilion is filling up. You have the gorsedd. It's one of the ceremonies that is led by the gorsedd of the Druids, and the archdruid leads through the ceremony. You have the big sword as well, which is normally carried by the sword bearer. Needs to be a big strong man. It's actually the current coach of the Welsh rugby team, of the forwards. He's the bearer of the sword. And then you have the former archdruids, and then you have all the bards and the druids in their blue garments, white garments, and green garments. And then you welcome up the 3 adjudicators. So there's tension in the room. You don't know at this point if there's going to be a poet winning the chair or not. One adjudicator each year is chosen to read the adjudication, and then they say, my teilangdod, there is worthiness. And when people hear teilangdod, it means, oh great, we're going to have a chairing ceremony. If they neb and deilung, no one is worthy, then it's the big downer. And then we all become depressed, and we think that Welsh culture is dying because no one is good enough to win the chair. That's why it's quite a depressing thing, maybe. So once they've announced the name, or the nom de plume, because you have to write under a false name, and then once that has been announced, the archdruid says, "Ar ganiad y corn glad," on the once the trumpet fanfare plays, will Fleur de Lis or Le Mec de là-bas, or whatever you want to call yourself. You can call yourself a ridiculous name, like for example Myrddin ap Dafydd, when he won the chair, he called himself Pawb yn y Pavilion, which was everybody in the pavilion. So the archdruid had to say, will everybody in the pavilion stand up? So and he had to specify, will the poet named everybody in the pavilion only stand up? Otherwise it's going to be really confusing. Yeah, so then there's a floodlight, a spotlight that goes around the pavilion. It's all dark. The trumpets have just played, and so on. And then the poet stands up, and then some people might recognize the poet, some people might not. Is it young? Is it a man? Is it old? It's usually, hopefully, a younger person, but there's no rules against older people. There have been rules, by the way, where you can only win the chair twice, but they've got rid of that now, so you can win the chair as many times as you want. And then the poet standing up is led down by a gosgordd, an entourage, who put a purple gown on the poet and is led up to the chair, and then they have to present who it is, give his or her real name, where are they from, what do they do, and so on and so on. And then they come to the main important part of the ceremony, where you ask the audience, a gwir yn erbyn y byd, the truth against the world, a oes heddwch, is there peace? And then the audience is supposed to shout back at the Archdruid, peace, heddwch. And then once they hear the word heddwch, the big sword, which is opened above your head, if you're the winning poet at this point, you have a big sword opened above your head. It's like Game of Thrones at this point. And it's like, are they going to chop his head off or not? But it's a big sword of peace. It doesn't get taken out of its sheath. And then it's closed 3 times. And once that's happened, the poet may then sit in the peace of the Eisteddfod in his prize, which is a newly fabricated chair. You know, it's quite a big thing. It's a big ornament, and it's made of wood, normally with local symbolism on it by a local craftsman. And it might have some writing on it. Some chairs are really nice looking, some chairs are a bit strange, and so you don't know what kind of chair you're going to win the previous when you're competing, so that's a luck of the draw as well. Normally you're hoping it's going to be aesthetically pleasing, but you know, there are all kinds of different chairs, and that is also an interesting cultural point. There's a website for collecting Eisteddfod chairs, documenting where do they go, because once bards take them home, they stay as part of family ornaments and heirlooms, but sometimes people die and then they get auctioned off, or they end up in strange places. So yeah, following chairs is a strange Welsh hobby as well, and you get some in museums and so on. But that's the general gist of it. It's one of the greatest days of your life as a poet if you want to win the chair. It's a day you don't forget, and certainly not a day I forgot. And it feels, when you're standing there in the lights and in your purple garment, it feels like the nation is shaking your hand and congratulating you. But it's important to remember also, that's not the end of your journey as a poet. Hopefully it's the beginning of it. It's the start of your work. You have serious work to do after that of continuing. It's just a legitimization, a certification of your worthiness as a poet, and people know, oh well, he should be able to write poetry to a good standard. We can use him in our society for poetic purposes.
So do you have to write about, you have to write King Annes, but you have to write about a theme? Is it
normally, in some very rare years, they don't set a theme at all. They say it's an open theme, but usually there's a theme. So for example, in the coming Eisteddfod, for the chair, it's Gorwelion, which means horizons. When I won the chair, it was Ffiniau, meaning borders or frontiers maybe. The more general the theme, the better really, because you normally, yes, there's a theme, but you normally impose your vision or your idea. Maybe you have a story in mind, or a set piece that you're going to be describing, which you need a lot of stamina to keep it up in terms of standard for 250 lines, so it's good to have a good structure. But yes, there's a theme usually given for the crown and the chair. Sometimes they can be off-putting. In old days, they used to pick members of the royal family to write about, and you're like, well, am I going to write an ode to Prince Charles? I don't know, and so on. But yes, it might be mountains, lakes, abstract things, and yeah, normally it's for an ode, but sometimes they ask for a collection of poetry, which some poets prefer, because it's like writing a short volume of poetry. Then you can go in all kinds of directions. But normally they ask for a sequence, so you need some kind of unity or a string, a narrative, holding it, binding it together as well.
Yeah, I forgot to ask you, how did you enter this contest?
Well, you have to type up your poem. Normally, you would in the old days handwrite your poem, and the judges would hope you have good handwriting. But these days they ask for a typed copy. You have to print 3 copies off and send a memory stick or a CD of the poem in case it wins and then needs to go into the adjudication volume of poetry. So then you have to send it to the office of the Eisteddfod with a cheque for £5. It's not cheap, and you have to pay a small fee for the honour of competing. And then you send a separate envelope with your personal details, your name, your address, phone number, and so on in there. And on the paper, all you give along with the title and your poem is your nom de plume, is your fake name, so that the judges don't know who you are, because that you're supposed to be on a level playing field. And because Wales, we all know each other, a lot of judges. Some judges like to play guess who the poet is, and sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they make accusations that this poet and they know who it is, and they're completely wrong. So, but that's basically the system.
And can I ask you, what was your bardic name?
My bardic name, the fake name I'd used that year was Tad Diamadverth. Which means helpless father. It was relating to the story I'd written about a father whose son wanted to go and fight ISIS, and it was about the refugee crisis that was happening at the time. So there was this tension drama between father and son. The father was a pacifist, the son wanted to be a soldier, and so there's that tension, and the father can't stop his son, who's now 16 or 18 and decided to join the army, from joining. But there's also, are we helpless in terms of, there was the theme of screens. We take in a lot of imagery of war through the news or through the internet, and we can switch it off quite easily, whereas people who live through it don't have the luxury of that. Are we helpless in the sense that these wars happen maybe due to a major arms industry that exists in the world, maybe due to governmental decisions, or that things that even in a democracy you can't affect. So it's wondering, are we helpless, or can we do little things that can change things? So yeah, that's what that meant. But in terms of a poetic name, some poets have a poetic name as well as their real name. But with a name like Aneirin Karadog, you don't need a poetic name because it sounds ridiculous enough as it is. But some poets, if you are called John Taylor, which is maybe not, there are no poets I know of, hopefully, called John Taylor, but it's not a particularly Welsh name. You might choose the name of the area where you come from, or you might be John Frongoch, or the name of the farm, or you might find a bardic name like Heddwyn. That was a poetic name. His real name was Ellis Humphrey Evans, but he was known as Heddwyn. There are some poets today who still continue that tradition, but if you have a really Welsh name, and no other poet has been known by that name, then you don't really need to pick a bardic name for yourself, except for in the competitions.
Do you have a specific role during the year you're the chaired bard?
Well, one thing you have to do is you have to go and visit some societies literature societies or cultural societies who meet and they expect the chaired bard to go and visit them on tournée, quoi, as a little tour. So it's quite an honour to go, and you get to talk about your winning poetry for that year, and maybe sign some autographs but they're mainly maybe older people, so your fans are maybe grey-haired, but there we go. There's still young people who read these works, so that's one task that awaits you, is to go around talking about your poetry, but also then you get for the year, you get used by publications, you get more invitations to do commission work, I suppose, and then also you have to pick you have to pick a bardic name to become a member of the Gorsedd. So once you've won the chair, the following year is when you are initiated in your white robe. It's not the Ku Klux Klan, it's complete opposite, hopefully. You get a white robe and a head robe as well, and green laurel leaves on your head, which can look a bit strange, but there we go. Other members of the Gorsedd the Bays don't have the leaves, so they feel, I'm more important than a poet. So you have to pick a name. So I actually have a Gorsedd name, which is Neu o'r Bont, Neu from the bridge, because I grew up in Pontardawe and then in a place called Pontypridd, and in Wales I'm currently living in Pontyberem. They all have Pont or something, so they all have a bridge connection, so I'm Neu from the place with the bridge in it. Neu ar Punt, maybe you'd say in Breton. But yeah, you get you're the prime person for people to go towards to write poetry as commission, for example, and also you might might have a degree of celebrity for the immediate months afterwards. People might invite you on to TV shows or radio programs, even and which can be strange. I've heard of poets who've become adjudicators in local Eisteddfod of the disco dancing competitions. They think, all of a sudden you've won the poetry, you can judge how big people's marrows are or how good the dance moves in the discotheque are, and so on. And so yeah, people tend to put too much value on a winning poet, maybe, and you need to learn to say no. But yes, I've had some strange invitations like that. For example, I was adjudicator in the Young Farmers Eisteddfod, and they said, well, can you do the poetry? I said, yes, of course I can do the poetry. And then also, can you do the music? I said, I don't know about the music. And then I opened the envelope that contained the literature work, and I was suddenly adjudicating Snapchat geofilters. I didn't know what a Snapchat geofilter was at the time. I still don't really know, but there we go. I gave first prize to one poor young farmer, but there we go. So yeah, you get people tend to maybe appreciate their poets a bit too much in the immediate aftermath. There's also an important role which is called the National Children's Poet of Wales, and those can be previously chaired poets, but poets who are good working with young people and children, maybe poets who are renowned. But yeah, the National Children's Poet of Wales is funded by the Assembly. You get paid to visit schools and go around Wales for 52 days of each year. So that's an official job title that is changed every 2 years, a new person. So that's a similar type job, but an important one that happens in Wales as well. Bardd Plant Cymru.
Okay, so finally, what has this experience given you?
It has allowed me to work as a freelance poet, but it's given me a deeper, even yet deeper love for my culture and language, and a wanting to pass that on to my children and to give back in my community and to other young poets that I see that are advancing in their careers. I think it's enriched me culturally, and I feel very privileged that to be able to be a part of this. And certainly you realise that it's unique tradition, it's a very vibrant tradition, and also the word tradition can be, oh, is it a dead thing or not? You know, a vibrant tradition needs to be evolving continuously. You can't stay in the same place. So it gives you an impetus to experiment, to look for ways of being original in your own poetry, and in terms of also conveying the beauty of Welsh poetry to other people. So for example, myself and another poet, Eisteddfod Salisbury, who has come second for the chair in the National Eisteddfod 5 times now, consecutively 5 times. He's come second, so you know he's good enough. He's just been unlucky. But Eisteddfod and I actually beat him as well in 2016. Eisteddfod, if you're watching, sorry about that. But we run a podcast, a monthly podcast called Clara, which people can listen to. It's all in Welsh, and it's all about Welsh language poetry. There are websites also run by other people who do similar things. I think people enjoy sharing in the poetry culture of Wales, and people enjoy sharing poems amongst each other. So I take a delight in that, and I feel very lucky, and it gives me a reason for being. You know, life without poetry would be like life without music for me.
Thank you very much, Aneirin.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Merci Braz.